Hi, my name is Sydney Grant, and I will be presenting on gender issues in disaster management. To begin, gender issues in disaster management can manifest in many ways. Both social and cultural factors, as well as differences in vulnerabilities, will be discussed in this presentation. Men and women both experience different disasters differently, whether it be from gender roles issues or solely due to differing perspectives on the disaster. Either way, gender roles play a large role in how a disaster is handled, and more often than not, it does not aid the recovery process. To start, we can define gender as dynamic, socially constructed characteristics of men and women. These norms are typically good representations of a society and largely impact how men and women behave, as well as how young boys and girls will grow up to learn to interact with one another. Stereotyping is one issue that arises very often with gender roles during a disaster. Men and women are typically expected to act in a certain way during a disaster, which usually influences their responses. For example, men are more likely to take on the sole provider role as they feel the need to care for their entire family without help, while women are often pushed into feeling helpless or just as domestic caretakers, both of which can be very taxing roles. The overall desire to be treated equally is something that is being pursued more and more each time a disaster occurs in order to provide equal aid. Although women are usually put into these domestic roles, there are examples of women challenging these stereotypical roles, such as women in Haiti, Syria, and Belize who have started receiving training for disaster management. Unfortunately, women are not utilized this way around the world. As previously mentioned, gender norms reflect the society's construct and value for one another, something that is not necessarily consistent globally. In most societies, women are at higher risk for danger because they're often left to domestic duties, which can be taxing during a disaster, and it does not help when they have no previous training. Another factor that creates higher risks for women is the fact that they're often grouped into specific occupations, such as agricultural jobs, which agriculture is one of the main fields that are affected most during a disaster. Lack of resources like information, transportation, and employment can greatly decrease a woman's chance for a successful recovery. Increasingly, however, women challenge these gender norms in the case of a disaster. For example, in cities like Honduras and Guatemala, women were seen to be the motivating and the most active forces behind the rebuilding of their communities after Hurricane Mitch in 1998. Moving on to cultural factors, depending on the cultural norms, women may not be allowed to participate in any relief or response plans, which not only takes away from the potential help they could lend their society as a whole, but also takes away from help in creating a preparedness plan just for women specifically if they are not allowed a leadership role. When women are confined to specific roles in a culture or a society, they're being deprived of training in order to take care of not only women specifically, but also their families and their neighbors as well. If a woman only knows to care for children or for domestic duties, for example, she may not have the same capabilities as a man would in surviving. For example, learning how to create a shelter or where to find food. Along with these factors, there are different vulnerabilities for men and women, which serves as a large impact. Previously mentioned, women are more vulnerable than men for many reasons. They have different needs than men and are oftentimes overlooked when relief plans are being created and implemented. The different needs of women can range from anything such as sexual and reproductive health issues to their training as well. Following a disaster, women are more likely to also experience sexual and domestic violence. Women often being confined to specific jobs, while men have the ability to pursue a multitude of occupations as well as in different locations, significantly decreases their chance for a successful recovery. Along with this, men are often more physically capable than women during a natural disaster. This, paired with the idea that women often have no training or room for participation in disaster relief, can put women at even more of a disadvantage if there is no one to help them. Here are some statistics showing evidence of the equality that genders receive during a disaster. Natural disasters lower a woman's life expectancy 14 times more than a man. These statistics show how gender can influence survival and the ability to recover during and after a disaster. Many factors influence these rates, however, women and children are at the highest risk in midst of a natural disaster. To conclude, there are many factors that influence gender issues in a disaster. Cultural and social factors, as well as differing vulnerabilities between men and women, can heavily impact survival, recovery, and relief productiveness. Because gender roles can be so prevalent in a society, it is often very difficult to break them, especially during a disaster. Women are often left to their own devices, which can potentially produce poor results, such as when women are forced to carry out domestic duties instead of helping provide relief. On the flip side, however, it can result in women challenging their gender roles and being large contributors to a successful recovery. The desire to neutralize gender roles is a process that has been going on for many years in an effort to provide equal attention to both men and women in a disaster.